Hey there, listener. My name is Jan Benz, and I'm the creator and host of Wicked Crimes South Africa. Wicked Crimes South Africa is a true crime podcast that focuses on true crimes in South Africa who have a link to the occult or supernatural. So if a cult did it, if it was part of a ritual, or there was some spooky connection, you'll find it all on this podcast. To give you a taste of this podcast, here's a little extract from our second episode, Mob Injustice, the murder of Mandla Sibiya. It is during this meeting the Induna would tell the community that the Isangoma he consulted revealed the names of Malabongwe's murderers, and the motive behind this was inspired by witchcraft. The Induna did request that the community members not be armed for this meeting, but due to his neglect in informing the police about his intentions for this meeting and what he would divulge, no real security was planned for the meeting, and several community members managed to sneak weapons in. It was in this meeting, of what sounds more like a traditional court than a community meeting, that Mandla Sibiya was accused of being one of the murderers, and was subsequently brought forward and asked to answer for his crimes. So, if you like what you heard over there, we are currently available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, and we're coming to more platforms soon. So hop on over and give us a listen.
The Oracle Network.
Welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige, and today's episode does contain details of extreme violence towards children and women. Just so you are warned ahead of time, this story is a grisly one. What happened to these victims is important so we can understand what they went through and suffered. This could happen to any of us or our loved ones, and to bring awareness to that and these victim stories, that is important to me. I tell you all of the time, monsters are real. And in this case, the monster pretends to be a salesman with his innocent child in tow. And his child is far from innocent as well. Do you ever go to the door for someone selling things, maybe just seeming to be looking for directions or something just really innocent? We want to be helpful and go to the door for some people that we don't know at times, but every time we do that, we are putting ourselves at risk. I don't want people to live in fear of everything, but I do want us to all be more cautious, aware, and to protect ourselves, even going to the door for someone if we feel it's necessary. Even if a child is with the person, that doesn't always mean it's safe to go to the door. It's a chilling thought, and I just want us all to be more careful because what happened to these people as babies, children, and adults can happen to you, me, or the people that we love if we are completely vulnerable. This story breaks my heart from start to finish. Some children just don't have a chance in the world to grow up to be as mentally stable as possible, non-violent, angry, and all other adjectives that describe troubled youth. Usually it starts by how we treat them in our home, the words and actions we are responsible for to lift all children up and not tear them down. Before you know it, you could be raising a serial killer or a person that has no idea how to handle their emotions or how they feel mentally. Again, this episode is a little graphic. This will be a longer episode, so let's just get right into it. On December 11th, 1935, Joseph Lee Brenner III was born to his father Joseph Brenner Jr. and his mother Judith at Northern Liberties Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 2 years later, December 1937, his mom took him to a Catholic foster home after her husband had up and left her. As a baby, he developed major separation anxiety. 1 year after that, October 15, 1938, Joseph was adopted by Anna and Stephen Kallinger. Joseph's biological mother tried to bribe the couple into handing over money for him, but they wouldn't do it. I wish that I could tell you that these people were a lovely pair who would impact little Joseph's life positively, but that's not what happened. This adoption would turn out to be a terrible situation for Joseph. Both Anna and Stephen horribly abused Joseph, and at only 6 years old, Stephen had beaten Joseph to the point that he developed a hernia. After leaving the hospital, they told him that the doctors also performed a surgery on his, quote, bird to keep it small and that it would never work properly. Bird is what the Kallingers called a penis for whatever reason. Joseph had been kicked in the groin by a little girl 3 weeks prior to the surgery. He claimed he didn't do anything to deserve it, but the couple chastised him anyway. When Joseph was in trouble, he had different forms of abusive punishments. Examples of these punishments: having to kneel on jagged rocks, eating feces, putting him inside of a closet and locking him up until they chose to let him out, forcing him to self-harm. They would scorch his skin with irons, beat him with belts, and the two would also starve him. At 8 years old, his mother beat him on the head with a hammer 4 times just because he wanted to go to the zoo with his schoolmates. He ran into the house and started to bang his head into the walls and tables as Anna chased him around the house with a broom. On top of suffering all of this excruciating cruelty from his adoptive parents, at 9 years old, he was raped by a group of male kids from around the neighborhood. Also, when he was 9, he cut up his classmates' coats because he didn't get a birthday present. At age 11, he started to steal things, and by the time he was 13, he had cut a hole in his wall to use for masturbation purposes. He used pictures of naked men and women to reach an orgasm, and soon he would use a knife to start stabbing the pictures, or he couldn't reach an orgasm at all. Still at 13 years old, he talks his parents into letting him go to camp for a few weeks. 10 days after getting home from camp, he heard voices telling him to cut someone. Joseph got on a city bus with a knife in tow. He got off the bus with a little boy and led him into the woods, instructing him to take off his pants while he held this little boy at knife point. Joseph never hurt the boy. He just ran off after he told him to take his pants off. He would go on to do this 3 more times over the next few months. With the last boys he did this to, Joseph reenacted what happened between him and the 2 older boys. Joseph says he put one boy's penis in his mouth as he held the other at knife point. As a child, Joseph was emotionally and mentally all over the place. He would act out and go against his parents. He would commit all of these horrible acts and lash out against his teachers. But at the same time, he had positive hopes and dreams for himself. He was angry and depressed, but still stayed hopeful. He desperately desired to grow up to write plays. In the 9th grade, Joseph even directed the school play of A Christmas Carol, and he played the role of Ebenezer Scrooge as well. For once, he was so proud of himself, but his parents didn't support him and laughed in his face for even wanting to do something like that. Joseph was 15 when he started seeing a girl named Hilda Bergman. They quickly began having sex early in their relationship. Joseph's parents did not approve of their relationship at all and told him that he needed to end it. Joseph shortly moved into his own place at 15 years old while he worked at his dad's shoe shop. He and Hilda stayed together, and for the first time ever, he actually had friends. He and his friends played poker, pool, and Joseph started drinking alcohol. At 17 years old, Joseph dropped out of school so he could work full-time at the shoe shop, and against his parents' wishes, he and Hilda ended up getting married and had 2 children together. Hilda eventually did leave Joseph because he was abusive, and she had found another man in September of 1956. Unfortunately, some people do to others what has been done to them. It's what they know, and a vicious cycle that a lot of people don't break. I've experienced this in my own family, the abused and hurt turning into what they hated the most. The ones I know who are like this don't even see that they have become who they despise. They're in major denial about it or don't want to face it and deal with the issues. In 1957, Joseph was in the hospital for what everyone thought was a brain lesion, but it was discovered to be a psychopathological nervous disorder. He was in a mental hospital for a while and was released in 1958. He got married again. He went on to have 5 children with this wife. The pattern continued with the domestic violence against his wife and children. He still had not broken the cycle of mistreatment of others, and he made his children suffer the same repercussions as he did as a child when he was in trouble. He lit their home on fire just to get $1,600 from the fire insurance. Joseph would spend the next 10 years in and out of mental facilities for suicide attempts and setting his new house on fire 3 or 4 times from 1963 to 1967. At some point, Joseph started wearing wedges in his shoes to adjust the slant in his body to be in sync with his brain. On January 23, 1972, he branded his eldest daughter with a sizzling iron because she ran away from home. At this time, they were all living in an extremely small apartment right on top of a shoe repair shop in Philadelphia. Later in 1972, 3 of his children decided enough was enough, and they went to the police about the abuse they were suffering. Joseph was put in jail for the abuse and neglect of his children. The state psychiatrist came to visit him in jail and gave him an IQ test. His score was 82. The psychiatrist also diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic and suggested that he only have visits with his family under supervision. He was found to be incompetent to stand trial. For some reason, the kids took back their allegations toward their dad. He did have to be on probation for 4 years and mandatory visits to a psychiatrist for treatment. Only 2 years later, Joseph told his son Michael, who was only 13, that God had ordered him to murder young boys and cut off their penises. He asked for Michael's help in this mission, and Michael responded with great enthusiasm. Joseph and Michael tortured a Puerto Rican child who was only 9 or 10, named Jose Calazo, on July 7, 1974. The child was simply playing at a playground. but he was by himself, which made him an easy target for the two. The child was found horrendously mutilated. From here on out, you will hear grisly details of the crimes they committed, and some of it is about children and women, and I just want you to be warned again about that. Joseph soon took a huge insurance policy out on his second son, Joseph Jr., who was 13 or 14 at the time, and there was a purpose for that. He would be their next victim, who they drowned in a building that had been deserted. This was all because he was one of the children who went to the police to report the violence they were experiencing by the hands of their father. Joseph Jr.'s death went unsolved for a few years. Joseph was questioned, but there wasn't evidence to pin this crime on him. Some sources say he first attempted to make Joseph Jr. walk backwards off of a cliff, taking pictures of his son, saying something like, "Okay, back up a little more. Now a little more." But that plan failed. Before the little boy was drowned, Joseph took both of his children to commit arson and tried to trap Joseph Jr. in a trailer that was burning down. When that didn't work, that's when they took Joseph Jr. to an abandoned building and drowned him. This would only be the beginning of their crimes they committed together. This episode is sponsored by smartassandsass.com, and trust me, you need this subscription box in your life. You'll have snark and sarcasm delivered monthly. All you have to do is pick your box, choose a payment plan, and continue to be your sasshole self as you wait for your monthly box to arrive. Each month arriving at your doorstep will be 8 or 9 hand-picked items especially for you. You'll be extremely satisfied with your snarky, sassy, and smart-assy box. Plus, these Smart Ass and Sass subscription boxes are valued at $90 or more per box. But because this company is so awesome, their subscription boxes start as low as $34.95. And when my listeners use the code TrueCrime10, you'll get a discount. These items say exactly what's on your mind, so go scoop up your box today at smartassandsass.com. That's smartassandsass.com and use the code TrueCrime10 for a discount on your subscription box. smartassandsass.com, discount code TrueCrime10. It was around this time that Joseph claimed he was steadily haunted by a floating head that talked to him and went everywhere he went, and he couldn't escape it. The head was named Charlie, who he blamed for all of his bad behavior and horrendous crimes. In July of 1974, Joseph and Michael went on a 6-week crime spree in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Maryland, and New Jersey. They were stealing from, beating, and sexually abusing families, 4 to be exact, and murdered 3 people. They went around under the guise of being salesmen, and that's how they would get into people's homes. One victim was Joan Carty on November 22, 1974. They bound her to her bed and sexually assaulted her. Almost 2 weeks later, in Pennsylvania, they held 5 women hostage who were in the middle of playing a game of bridge, never expecting this to ever happen to them in a million years. They tied them all up and robbed them at knife point. The duo ran off with $20,000 in jewelry and money, but not before they sliced one breast of one of the women. Another victim was Pamela Jask, or Jask, who lived in Homeland, Maryland. They held her hostage and raped her by forcing her to give Joseph a blowjob while a gun was pressed against her head. On January the 6th, they did the same exact thing to Mary Rudolph in Dumont, New Jersey. Right before 11 in the morning, a mailman named Salvatore Tufo was delivering the mail when he saw Joseph and Michael walking and looking really closely at all of the houses in the area. What was bizarre to Salvatore was the way the two were acting towards each other. As they were walking, they were cuddling and holding hands. It just struck him as odd, and it was a little more extreme than just being a loving father and son moment. A woman that also lived in the area named Lucy saw the duo around 12 in the afternoon as she was on the phone, and she happened to look out of her window. She too mentioned that they were acting, quote, offensively effeminate. Only minutes later, Lucy left her home. The two were still scanning the area. At 3:20, Lucy had gotten back home because her daughter was going to be coming home from school soon. Her daughter Andrea got home around 10 minutes later. Not long after she arrived, Lucy went outside to check her mail. As she happened to look across the street, her neighbor Edwina Romaine jumped out of the front door of her home at number 124 Glenwood Avenue as she was screaming bloody murder. Lucy got a little closer to Edwina, and she heard her rambling something about a killing. Lucy knew that Edwina's husband, DeWitt, was in the hospital due to a severe heart attack. She thought that DeWitt must have passed away. She couldn't really understand what Edwina could have been talking about except that. Shortly after that moment, Edwina fell on her porch and begged Lucy to untie her feet. Her feet had been bound with a thin cord. Instead of untying her, Lucy took off running back to her home to call the police. What Lucy did not know was hours before this happened, around the same time Salvatore saw the man and little boy walking the street, Dee Dee Romaine Wiseman and her 4-year-old son Robert arrived at her parents' house. Dee Dee, who was 28, was the oldest of Edwina and DeWitt's 3 children, as well as the only married child. Her 2 sisters were 21-year-old twins named Randy and Retta, and they still lived at home. Dee Dee came to visit her sick grandmother, while her mother, her sister Retta, and Retta's boyfriend left to visit an elderly relative, and Randy was visiting her father in the hospital. When they were all gone, Dee Dee had gone down to the basement to wash clothes. Around lunch, her daughter Wendy, who was only 7 years old, came home from school to eat lunch. After lunch was finished around 12:45, Dee Dee took Wendy back to school. As she was pulling away, she saw a man and boy walking along Glenwood Avenue, and they definitely saw her as well. After she dropped off her daughter at school and went straight back home, Dee Dee checked on her grandmother and began cleaning the house. During this time, she peered out of the window and saw the man and boy walking up to the house. She met them at the front door, and the man said he was a, quote, John Hancock salesman. He asked if there was anyone else inside. Dee Dee was completely disturbed by the way that he was acting and told him to leave. Joseph proceeded to grab Dee Dee and push his way into the home as Michael was standing nonchalantly on the porch. Dee Dee later told that the man was tan with piercing dark eyes, and he did not smell good at all. Dee Dee was not going down without a fight, and during the tussle, Joseph pulled out a gun. Hearing all of this racket, Dee Dee's son Robert came into the room, and, upon seeing his mother grappling with this intruder, began yelling. Joseph turned to Robert and pointed the gun at his head, saying, quote, "This is a robbery," as he yanked Dee Dee's hair. "Do as I say, and you won't get hurt." He put the gun in his pocket and pulled out a long knife, demanding that Dee Dee better not look at him, telling her, quote, "Keep your eyes shut." When he asked again if there was anyone else in the house, Dee Dee said that her bedridden grandmother was the only other person there. Making Dee Dee walk in front of him, he forced her up the stairs to the grandmother's bedroom, with Robert hanging on for dear life to his mother. Joseph told Michael to check the elderly woman to see if she was really bedridden, and he told his dad yes, she was. Joseph pushed Dee Dee into a bedroom that was empty and told her he needed scissors. Well, she told him that she had no idea where any scissors were. He gagged her and wrapped her face in tape, making sure that her eyes and mouth were completely covered. He demanded that she take off her clothes, and she shook her head, declining, so he stripped her himself, asking her if anyone else would be coming to the house. Dee Dee nodded yes, while Joseph took her jewelry off and bound her hands behind her back. He went on to ask what time her little girl was supposed to be home, and she showed him 5 fingers, indicating 5 o'clock. He tied her elbows and ankles together with electrical cord. Joseph yelled out to Michael, "Make sure the front door is locked." Joseph began taking Dee Dee's son's clothes off, laying him nude beside his mom on the bed. Joseph rolled Dee Dee over onto her back and spread her legs apart to see that she was on her period. Disgusted by this, he yanked her tampon out and threw it on the ground. Then the doorbell rang. It was Dee Dee's sister, Randy. She was home from the hospital and was alarmed that the door was locked. She began to unlock it when Joseph flung the door open and roughly pulled her inside with a gun to her head. He told her this was a robbery and she better do what he said. Joseph demanded her to not look at him, to give him money, and she handed him $5. He forced her down the hallway and into the bedroom where Dee Dee and Robert were laying nude on the bed. Randy peeked her eyes open, and when she saw them like that, she was scared to death. She thought they were dead at first. To calm her down, Joseph let her see if they were still breathing and had a pulse. Yet again, he said he wanted money, and she told him there was some money inside of a box on top of the dresser drawer. Michael was checking the box as Joseph ordered Randy to remove her clothes, and she did, as Joseph took out his knife, asking if anyone else was going to be arriving home. Randy told him yes, and there would be a lot of people coming. Acting as if he didn't even hear what she had said, he tied her up the same way that he did Dee Dee. He also spread her legs apart and saw that she too was on her period and yelled out, "What's this?" and stomped out of the bedroom. Randy could only lay there paralyzed by fear, her mind reeling about what could possibly happen the next time the doorbell rang or the next time that he entered the room. Edwina Romaine arrived home with Retta and her boyfriend Frank Welby, and they were surprised that the door was locked. Edwina was almost about to ring the doorbell when a stranger with a gun swung the door open and told them to get inside. The instructions were the same. Do as you're told and you won't get hurt. The three were told to get in the living room and lay down. Frank was on one side of the room, while the women were forced to be on the other. Joseph took off everyone's jewelry and tied Edwina and Retta's feet with the cord of a Venetian blind. Michael was holding a gun to Frank's head, while his dad began tying Frank's hands together with his own belt. Joseph then instructed his son Michael to get the vacuum cord and tie up the women's feet again, thinking the cord from the blinds wasn't good enough. Michael bound Retta as he was told, but he had trouble tying Edwina's hands together. Joseph said, quote, "Don't bother with her. She's too old to do anything anyway." Joseph and Michael exited the room to look for more things that were possibly valuable to steal. Eventually, there was a knock at the door. It was Edwina's 21-year-old neighbor, Maria Fashing, a nurse. Edwina heard yelling before Maria was brought into the living room and forced to lie down too. Since Frank was one of the only male captives in the home, and he saw him as a threat, Joseph gagged him with a handkerchief, wrapped tape around his face, and hog-tied him. The son and father took Frank to the basement and stripped him of his pants and underwear, pulling them down to his knees. Joseph pulled his knife out and had the blade on Frank's penis, telling him that if he dared to move, quote, "This will go." Frank heard Maria shortly after arguing with the man and boy as she was being brought down to the basement as well. He couldn't see anything, but he could hear that Maria was being raped. Everyone in the home heard Maria's screams clearly, and they were terrified as she screamed, "Help me! He's hurting me! I'm drowning!" Edwina was now in flight or fight mode, scared that she and or her daughters were going to be the next victims of whatever was happening to Maria in the basement. She made it to her feet and staggered to the front door, which is when she started yelling for help and Lucy noticed. Michael started screaming that somebody was loose. Retta began to roll behind the sofa, trying her best to hide. Randy in the bedroom was able to get her feet untied and ran to a window to look at her mother. After Lucy called the police for help, Sergeant Robert McDougal and his partner, Sergeant Henry Alston, arrived not knowing what they were about to walk into. They were met by Lucy, who said she had called because Edwina was screaming and panic-stricken. As both sergeants walked towards the house, they saw Edwina on the porch with her feet bound. She started screaming about two men with guns and knives murdering her family, crying and begging them to go inside to save their lives. Sergeant McDougal went to his police car and called for backup. He took out his gun as he went towards the house, carefully and slowly going inside, while Sergeant Alston was trying to take care of Edwina. Sergeant McDougal listened for any noise and tiptoed down the hallway to the kitchen. As he went by the living room, he saw that it was a wreck. There were smashed vases and other items all over the floor, cords taken from many appliances and tossed about the room. Then, suddenly, he heard something on the other side of the room. He had the barrel of his gun pointed at the ceiling as he told whoever it was to come out with their hands up. Retta was scared and shaking, but she did her best to crawl out from behind the sofa. Sergeant McDougal wanted to know who else was home, but she was paralyzed in fear, unable to get the words to come out at first, until she eventually said the word upstairs, as the sergeant was undoing her bindings and ordering her to get out of the house. He started to make his way up the stairs, hearing moans and quiet cries from a nearby bedroom. He took a glimpse into the room, seeing a naked Randy sitting on the floor, bound with her head wrapped in tape. Dee Dee and Robert were still laying on the bed, also bare but unharmed. Sergeant McDougal untied them while Detective Roger Quinton was pulling up at the home. Edwina told him there were people in the basement. The detective and 2 other police officers ran down to the basement. It was so dark they couldn't see as they were trying to find the light switch. When he finally found it, he turned on the light to see a young woman, Maria, slumped over in a corner, dressed in white with blood all over her. As the detective moved in, he realized her throat had been slit from one ear to the other. When Maria said that she was drowning, she was. She did drown in her very own blood, all because Joseph ordered her to bite off Frank's penis and she said no. The police heard whimpers from the other side of the basement and saw Frank bound, and his face was also covered in tape. He thankfully was not injured. New Jersey police began to look more into Joseph after they had gotten their hands on a blood-stained shirt that Joseph had so carelessly and luckily gotten rid of by the home, which they traced back to him. Soon enough, the police uncovered the grisly details about Joseph's past, the domestic abuse that he inflicted on his wives and children, Joseph Jr.'s mysterious death, as well as Jose's, and buildings that Joseph owned that were set on fire. Enough evidence was gathered, and the Philadelphia Homicide Squad started planning to take down Joseph and Michael at their home around 9:30 at night on January 17th. Many other police and other jurisdictions wanted in on this arrest pretty badly, and the prosecutor did let 2 detectives from each jurisdiction go with him to the house of Joseph Kallinger's. They raided the home and arrested Michael and his little brother James, but they couldn't find Joseph. They looked around the house and discovered that a hole had been cut out of the wall, which led to Joseph's mother's house. They figured Joseph had probably taken off, but when they went into the mom's house, there was Joseph on the phone with his lawyer. He knew the jig was up and let police take him to jail. He told them he did not have a problem talking to them without a lawyer in the room. As he was being hauled off to the police station in Philadelphia, his house was being investigated. The authorities found a huge stash of jewelry, money, and more that had been robbed from their victims. They did find out that James had nothing to do with any of these crimes. The detectives had their sights set on Michael, hoping he would fall apart and would incriminate his dad. When Michael was being taken to the interrogation room, he passed his dad in the hall, and he said, quote, "If you tell them anything, I'll kill you." Either because Michael was petrified of his father, or he was just so devoted to him he wouldn't implicate him after hours of questions from the police, psychiatrists, and social workers. Joseph and Michael were charged with rape, theft, and kidnapping, later being charged with 3 counts of murder in New Jersey state courts. Joseph said he wasn't guilty by reason of insanity, saying God told him to kill those people. He said he also had a second personality that he called Charlie, and that Charlie did all of the killing. Whether he was severely mentally ill or acting as if he was to prevent going to prison for life is still unclear. I do think he had some mental health issues. Joseph told police that he had made a bowling alley next to his bed and practiced bowling at night. These claims were later written off. The more he was interrogated, the stranger he acted, and the more he would say the weirdest things. He began telling psychologists that God had sent him to Earth on a divine mission. This included assisting people whose brains' wires were crossed because they wore shoes that were terribly designed for them. He also told police that he was thousands of years old, living a lot of his life as a literal butterfly, and had been constantly hunted by the devil. Joseph's first trial took place in Pennsylvania, with the jury not being able to agree on whether he was actually sane or not, taking into consideration that he had worked as a shoe repairman for years and the fumes from a leather treatment had an extremely dangerous chemical substance in it that could possibly numb a person's senses and damage their brain. They just couldn't make heads or tails of his mental state, or if he could have suffered some kind of brain damage, which resulted in a hung jury in June of 1975. A few months later, there was a retrial where he was convicted on 9 felony counts with a sentence of 30 to 80 years in prison. The judge said he was, quote, an evil man, utterly vile and depraved. In New Jersey, after being evaluated by multiple psychiatrists, they all came to different conclusions, some saying that he was sane, while others said he was a paranoid schizophrenic. But on October 14, 1976, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. While he was in prison, he worked in the prison shoe shop. He seemed to be mentally stable for several months and was promoted to workshop supervisor. He spent his extra time taking courses, writing poetry, and seemed to be adapting to life in prison. His son Michael was determined by the jury to be under the thumb of his dad, ruled a delinquent, yet possibly able to be saved, and was only sentenced to a young offenders institution until he was 25 years old in December of 1982. The murder charges were completely dismissed. All he had to do was plead guilty for the 2 counts of robbery, which he did. When Michael was let out, he moved out of New Jersey and changed his name. Joseph eventually snapped and made many suicide attempts in prison, even trying to set himself ablaze multiple times. He also tried to fry an egg on his own head and would keep cups of urine and feces which he would hurl at the guards. Joseph made it clear repeatedly, even during televised interviews, that he wanted to slaughter everyone on this earth. He assaulted many other inmates and slit a fellow prisoner's throat, only severely wounding the inmate and not killing him. Due to his behavior, suicidal and violent, he was sent to a mental hospital in Trenton, New Jersey. On May 18, 1979, he was taken to a mental facility in Philadelphia called Fairview. Conflicting reports say he was taken there in 1990, but maybe he was taken back and forth over the years. I'm not sure, but Joseph said he had talks with God, and whenever he died, he himself would turn into God. Joseph ripped the plastic covering from his mattress on one occasion and tried to smother himself with it. He went on religious hunger strikes and claimed he was sorry for all he had done. By the mid-1980s, Joseph had gone to trial and been convicted of murdering 9-year-old Jose Calazo and Joseph Jr., which tacked on 2 more life sentences. On March 26, 1996, Joseph was back in the state prison in the hospital region of the prison, and he passed away at 59 years old due to an epileptic seizure, choking to death on his own vomit. He was under suicide watch for the last 11 years of his life. Valerie Collins, the sister of victim Maria Fashing, said, quote, "The world is just a little better place now that he's dead. But we as a family suffer to this day. We will never stop suffering." And that does it for this episode. Thank you so much as always for listening, and until next time, please stay safe, be aware of your surroundings at all times, and take care.